Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Chris Fuller, and I am the Chief Sponsorship and Mission Integration Officer at St. Joseph's College of Maine. I'll welcome you to this online event for the St. Joseph's College Center for Faith and Spirituality. We try to offer these kinds of informative opportunities for people to join us and learn more about different faith traditions, as well as take part in workshops as well from a variety of faith perspectives. And so this is the first of a series which I hope to host through the Center for Faith and Spirituality, which has to do with the scriptures of the great traditions. And so the first is to take a look at the Holy Qur'an. And our guest with us today is Muhammadu Jagne. And so, Muhammadu, why don't you introduce yourself to us first? In terms, I know you're joining us from Boston, and you're with a Boston Islamic Center. So, if you could introduce yourself a little for us, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Sounds good. Okay. Hello, everybody. I was looking at where everybody's coming from. Wow, it's incredible from all over the country. It's nice to meet you. So, yeah, I am joining you actually not from Boston, but from Portland, South Portland, Maine. I'm working remotely.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I am working at Boston Islamic Seminary. I am the Student Affairs and Admissions Manager. So Boston Islamic Seminary has just launched its Masters of Islamic Leadership program. And I'm kind of overseeing both the admissions and student affairs side of that program. But prior to joining this role, I was at USM in admissions, and then Columbia University, then Bucknell University in their Office of Religious and Spiritual Life as a general chaplain and Muslim chaplain. So this is something I've been at for about a good decade and a half of my life. It's really nice. I earned my Master's of Divinity from Harvard in Islam and African religions. And I'm originally from West Africa as well. So it's really nice to meet you all.
Well, great. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. So let's just start with some kind of, foundational questions. One is the Holy Quran itself, in terms of Islamic tradition, how does it come to the Prophet Muhammad? What's the origin story, if you will, of the Holy
Yes,
Quran?
thank you. So the Holy Quran was revealed. We use the word revealed specifically because it was believed it was sent directly to the Prophet by God via the angel Gabriel. And the story of Revelation is actually one that's really interesting. So the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, was born in 570 in Mecca. And when he was about the age of 40, he had already been married to his wife, Khadija. And this would have been a little bit before he was 40. But he was in a cave in Mecca. He was inside of a cave during the 30 days that are now known as the month of Ramadan. It hadn't yet been called the Ramadan, but it was a common practice at the time for 30 days out of the year for people of that region to fast and seclude themselves spiritually for 30 days. So he did that in the cave. And while he was in the cave, it was believed that he was practicing breathing and meditation and a variety of practices. And then one solemn night, which is believed to be the 27th night of the Ramadan, Angel Gabriel descended, revealed himself to him, wrapped him really tight in some type of cloth, untied him, and then pronounced the words Iqra, which means read. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your creator. And then it goes on for 5 more verses. So those first 5 verses that were revealed are captured in chapter 96 of the Qur'an. And it's called Al-Alaq, which means the clot, as in the clot, blood clot that man was made from. And it was in that fateful moment that the Qur'an, in the form of those first verses, was revealed to him. And terrified, the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, ran out of the cave into the arms of his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, and told her the story. And she comforted him and lifted his spirits and calmed him from his terror and said, "You can do this." I'm paraphrasing, obviously. She said something way more beautiful than that. And as a result, she is known as the first Muslim, the first person to have accepted the message from God. And as a result, she is known as the mother of the believers. So that's a very 5-year-old abbreviated version of Revelation, the first moment. And then over the next 23 years of the Prophet's life, moments like these kept happening, where episodes of his life, verses of the Qur'an, would be revealed to him. Do you want me to keep going, or stop there?
So what was the period of time then during which the verses were revealed to him in terms of the revelations and the writing down, and, if you will, the kind of completion of the Quran?
Yeah, so the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, he passed away in 632. So if you subtract 23 years, so around I'm sorry, I'm not very good at math. But the late 590s, yes, that is when the Quran was revealed to him. And so over the next 20 years, he had an amazing life full of tragedy, triumphs, war, marriages, children, but only a few of them lived, and they were all daughters. That's going to be significant when we talk about after his life. And all of those stories, verses would basically be revealed during key moments of his life. And so the meaning of, if you read the Quran and you try to decipher the meaning, you can't just look at the language itself, but also look at the context in which it was revealed. Because if you read the Quran the way you read the Bible, without understanding the history of how it was revealed and then compiled, you might believe that Muslims think certain things, for example, about Jews and Christians, which is not exactly true, because it was specific to the time that it was revealed. I'm specifically referring here to chapter 5 of the Quran, which is what's called a Medinan surah, and it was the last revelation to the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him. And that revelation basically described the rules and regulations around what we can eat and not eat, and how we interact with Jews and Christians. And it's basically saying that we have brought upon you each a law for you to follow. So Muslims have a law to follow, Christians and Jews have a law to follow, and it says we have to respect and honor each of those laws and the right for people to live in accordance to those laws. The average Muslim, if you just read what the Quran says, will not be able to decipher that. And so that's what that's the first thing that comes to my mind. I'm going to be honest, I didn't anticipate this would be a Q&A. I thought I was just going to give you a PowerPoint, but this is a lot more fun.
If you'd rather do it that way, I'm fine with that as well.
No. Let's do this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so you mentioned a surah. So can you explain to us what a surah is? Because the Quran is organized by surahs, correct?
Correct. So surah is translated as chapter.
Okay.
So it is comprised of 114 surahs, chapters, and they're organized in order of, I would say, longest to shortest, roughly. The first surah is called Surat Al-Baqarah, meaning the cow. It is 286 verses long, and then the last surah, which ironically is not the shortest, number 114, is called An-Nisa, which means the people. And the way that Muslims are taught the Quran is in reverse order, starting with the shortest verse and then moving up to the longest one.
Oh, so you don't progress through it like, say, Christians would, starting in the book of Genesis and kind of going through
exactly
kind of narrative style.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, because we are taught, honestly, to memorize the Quran. Different countries do it differently. In Senegal, you're taught to read the whole thing and then translate and then memorize. And that takes about a lifetime.
Mhm.
But in other countries, they're able to do everything within a couple of years. So you can have a lot of young children who have memorized the entirety of the Quran before they're like 5.
Mm.
So things are different. So yeah,
So I mean,
it totals about 6,000 verses.
okay, and do I understand correctly that the desire, the preference is also to read and memorize the Quran in Arabic, correct?
Yes, in Arabic, in the original language. Correct.
And why is that? Because again, Christian and Jewish, right? Christians and Jews have traditions of translating, their text into many languages. And yes, you can find translations of the Quran. I have one myself in my office, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the desire in Christianity and Judaism, there's less an emphasis on the New Testament in Greek or to learn it in Greek, unlike in Islamic tradition where there is the desire, the initial desire, or the what's the right word I'm looking for, is the preference would be to learn how to read it in Arabic, correct?
Correct. And right. So that goes into a few things. One, the Quran, again, because of the way it was revealed under such, and is so before, because of its origin, it's believed to be the word of God directly. So you can't, and it was revealed in Arabic. So as a result, you can't alter what we believe to be the language of God. So that's the first thing. Because in English, let me just tell you, Arabic is a very complicated language. Like in English, you only have one word, for example, to say love. In Arabic, you have about 100. There's only one word to say camel. In Arabic, you have 1,000. So translating Arabic perfectly is an impossible feat. So as a result, we are taught to learn it in the original language so that we can capture the original and full meaning of the Quran. Now, there are some great translations out there, like my personal favorite by, I don't know if you guys can see it, M.A.S. Halim. This is one that I go to. It's the best English translation that I could think of. It's written in such a way that it follows a narrative structure. So it's like the Arabic text and the English. What was I saying? Yeah, so that's why it's important to memorize it in its original language. And okay, I want to give you one little thing.
Yes.
So there's a verse in the Quran from chapter 36. Yeah, I will type the author in the chat. Chapter 36 called Al-Yasin. And verse 5 starts with a verb called tanzilan. And in the way that the Arabic language is structured, the root of that verb means to descend, like rain. It's used to describe revelation. In English, the translation would be revelation. But in Arabic, there's like multiple verbs with that same root that can mean revealed all at once or revealed piecemeal. So throughout the Quran, you see that word nazala, and depending on its form, it can either mean revealed piecemeal. So when you're talking about the Quran, that's usually the one that's used, tanzilan, or it can be used as all at once, which is anzal. And when you describe the Bible, usually you use anzal, because Muslims believe that the Bible was, unlike the Quran, which was revealed over a period of time, the Bible was revealed all at once, and then people had to kind of like over time, like piece it together. Now, I don't know how true that is. To tell you the truth, I am not Christian. It's what I've heard.
Yes. No, I mean, this is about perspectives too, right?
Exactly.
This is about how different faiths understand or view each other, and even the sometimes there's interesting points of contact too. That you mentioned Muhammad's wife, right, who was the first Muslim, and you referred to her as the mother of Islam. Is that how you
the believers of the
mother
believers.
of believers, right? And I'm Catholic, and in the Catholic Church, Mary is the mother of the church, right? She was among the first believers of her son, right? The first disciple of her son, who followed her son, was at the foot of the cross of her son, and then in the Catholic Church, Mary is referred to as the mother of the church. So it's not the same thing, but it's interesting women playing that kind of role, right, within the context of the origins of these different faith traditions.
Absolutely.
In fact, Mary has a role in the Quran, does she not? She appears in the Quran.
She does. There's a whole chapter named after her. That chapter has multiple verses, as does chapter 3, Al-Imran, which talks about the birth and death of Jesus. Death is in quotation marks here, because in the Quran, in Islam, we don't actually believe Jesus died. Or at least we don't believe that he was crucified. What we believed is that he ascended directly to heaven, and that he was a figure like Jesus that was crucified. So we believe that the Romans were actually misled,
Okay.
which is a very fundamental difference. And then in his birth, the story of Jesus's birth, it's actually one of my favorite stories. There was no 3 wise men. There were no animals. There was no hay. There was no, it was literally Mary by herself, Maryam, by herself under a tree. She had put on, this is one of 3 parts where the word hijab is mentioned. She had put on a hijab, so like a veil, to like kind of hide herself, and is pregnant and is speaking to God directly. And God tells her to, she's pregnant and hungry, so she presses against a tree, and it says in the Quran, with all of her strength. However, it was actually believed to be just like a tap, and then I don't remember if it was dates or olives kind of fell down and gave her nourishment. And then she spoke directly, to God, and then God said, I'm gonna, you will give birth to a child. And she said, how can I give birth when no man has ever touched me? And then God says, if he wills it, it will happen. And then the angel Gabriel went to heaven, brought back a baby known as Jesus, Isa alayhi salam in Islam.
Yep.
And one fun fact about Isa is that he is the most mentioned prophet in the Quran. But Musa alayhi salam, is the most mentioned by name. So ironically, even though the Quran is the scripture of Muslims, the prior messengers of the Abrahamic faiths are mentioned more. But no, Mary plays a critical, is one of actually 3 women in the Quran that hold the highest regard in the eyes of God. So Mary is one. The wife of the Pharaoh is one. And who's the third? Oh, goodness gracious. I got distracted. The third is critical, but I can't remember her. She'll come back to me. Sorry about that.
No, and you mentioned, right, Moses is in the Quran.
Sorry, Hagar. Hagar is the third one.
Hagar. That's because she's the mother of Ishmael, right?
Exactly.
And Hagar's journey with Ishmael is part of Islamic tradition, right? It's part of the Hajj, correct?
It's part of the Hajj, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Correct.
Now you mentioned.
Would you like me to go into details about the Hajj, or?
Yeah, go ahead, please share with us the Hajj, because it has this scriptural foundation for Muslims. Yes. Exactly.
Yes. So the Hajj happens once a year, around the same time as our big celebration called Eid al-Adha. This year it was in July, and it's basically Hagar had to flee because she was banished by Abraham, and then in her path, her journey towards fleeing, she came across a well of water called the Zamzam. So it's part of the water that it's the holy water of Muslims. It's one that we drink. It has to come directly from that source. So part of the Hajj ritual involves visiting that well and drinking the water from there. She also had to march 7 times between 2 mountains, Safa and Marwa, because she was running frantically lost. So that's part of the march of Hajj, going back and forth between those two mountains. So you have to be of some level of fitness to be able to do the entire Hajj. My grandmother has done it over 25 times, and she's in her 80s now. I don't know how she does it, but she did. There's other steps that, including sacrificing a goat, because it commemorates when God had told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. The Quran doesn't specifically name him, but it's from the Bible it's Isaac. And as he was about to, knowing that he had full obedience to God, God replaced him with a sheep or a goat. And so people sacrifice a goat during this holiday called Eid al-Adha to commemorate that action. Okay. And it's part of the pilgrimage in Hajj.
Now, there are 5 pillars in Islam, correct?
Correct.
And do they all have scriptural basis coming from the Quran?
Yes. So the first verse, the first pillar, which is, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. So that's not actually in the Quran, but it's something that is repeated by Muslims several times a day. Mm-hmm. And then the second pillar is salat, which is prayer. So there is a verse in the Quran that describes how to perform prayer. It's actually in chapter 5, which is the last verse that was from the last chapter that was revealed in the Prophet's life. The one that says, that seals the religion. So that's described there. The Ramadan, fasting the 30 days in the month of Ramadan, is the third. And that's mentioned only once in the second chapter, in the second chapter, you could say, Al-Baqarah, which is the longest one, as I had mentioned before. And it's the only part of the Quran where the word Ramadan is mentioned. Fasting is mentioned somewhere else. Then the fourth pillar is called zakat, which means charity. The word zakat appears in the Quran several times, and it's about charity, not just in terms of financial contribution, although there are specific rulings that say you have to donate about 2.5% of your annual salary to charity. Like, that's specifically named. And, but charity does not just mean financial. It could also mean time. So like doing act of service, feeding the homeless. And it can even be a smile. A smile can be a form of charity. So smiling a lot with the intention of giving back is a form of charity. And then Hajj is the fifth one. Now, what's interesting about the 5 pillars is there are conditions that the more that you list them, there's not a ranking per se, but there are barriers to fulfilling them the more you go. So the first one is you just say something. You can say it with your mouth and make sound if you can. If you can't, you can say it with your heart. Anyone can do that. The second is prayer. If you're physically able to do it, you should pray in the ritualized prescribed manner. If you're not physically able to do it, you can either pray from sitting down, as I am, or from laying down. Like if you're in a hospital and you have, say you're in a full body casket, you can still pray mentally. So there are no excuses for missing these first 2. The third, during the month of Ramadan, fasting, not everybody is physically able to fast. So exceptions are made for women who are pregnant, women who are breastfeeding, women who are in their menstrual cycle. Actually, exceptions are made to pray as well. You don't have to pray if you're in your period. There's also exceptions made for people who are ill. So if you have a certain illness and you're not able to fast. And then the fourth is if you have the means to. So this may apply to a lot of millennials. If you're in $200,000 in debt and you don't have enough money that meets the threshold to be able to donate. There's a certain amount, bare minimum, that you have to have. It used to be measured in gold and silver. Now it's a financial amount. I think it's around £5,000. If you're not able to meet that, then you don't have to donate zakat. And then the last pilgrimage, the last pillar, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, if you have the means to, you should make it at least once in your lifetime. And if you're not able to, then you're not able to. There's about 1.6 billion Muslims right now, and less than just over 1 million go every year. So it's probably not accessible to most Muslims.
And you and when you talk about fasting, you mean fasting, right? Ramadan was it from sun up to sundown, right? No food or water, correct?
Correct.
And then there are different types of celebrations in the evenings at sundown to break the fast, correct?
Correct. So fasting is called in Arabic Sawm, which is exactly what you described. From sunrise, so about an hour before sunrise, you cannot eat or drink anything at all. You can't ingest anything. But you're allowed to taste something. So if you're like cooking and you want to taste if something is good, you can taste, but then you have to spit it right out. You cannot swallow. Then there's what's called Iftar. Iftar means basically breakfast. And that happens at sundown, right when the sun sets. Usually, you're supposed to break your fast. It's recommended to break your fast with a date, because that's what the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, did. Date and milk, or if that's not available to you, water. So taking a sip of water, and then you can break your fast. It's encouraged. Again, it's not a sin if you do this, but it's encouraged to not overindulge when you're breaking the fast. To have a small meal, and then do your prayers, and then later on, like, have a bigger meal. Like there's this is not in the Qur'an, but it's in a body of scripture called the Hadith that says man's stomach should be filled 1/3 with food, 1/3 with water, and 1/3 with air.
So you mentioned earlier that Moses is in the Quran, Abraham is in the Quran, right? There are Judeo kind of Christian figures are in the Quran. Again, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, the Muslim belief then about the Holy Quran, its role is the Jews and Christians had their scriptures revealed to them by God, but they're incomplete. They were obscured or tainted in some way by human intervention, and that the Quran revealed to Muhammad is the more complete revelation, which is why it includes them, but carries it forward. Is that a kind of correct understanding?
Yes. So it is believed that the Quran is the final revelation, and it recognizes all prior revelations that were brought. So the Torah, the Bible, etc. The Psalms are mentioned, which are part of the Torah, among other scriptures. And it is believed, like I was saying earlier, because of the way that the Quran was revealed directly from God over a very short amount of time. Every time that verses emerged, the companions of the Prophet, would write down all of the verses in anything they could find, whether they be leaves, whether they be bones, stones, even camel skin. They would just take everything down verbatim. And then after the Prophet passed away, then one of the third of the four rightly guided caliphs, which I'll get to later if there's time, compiled the Quran by bringing all of the pieces that had Quranic verses written on them, as well as all of the memorizations that were compiled, and he put it down in a book that is now known as the Uthmani script. His name was Uthman radiyallahu anhu. And so this was around in the 650s that he did this. 655, I think. And after he was the first and oldest complete book of the Qur'an was under his ruling. And then the official first published Qur'an that, like we all know, was in 1801. And that's any Qur'an that you see today chances are the first of its kind was in 1801. There were some ways that the Qur'an, the Uthmani script was written that we don't use today. For example, it didn't have any vowels, and today you would never see a Qur'an that doesn't have any vowels. But yeah, so how do I best put this? It is believed that the Qur'an was a miracle. The fact that it was revealed to the Prophet and that it was preserved in its full form is the miracle that the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, left us with. Every prophet performed miracles during their lifetime that aligned with the time that they were in. For example, Moses, around his time, there was a lot of magic. So his miracles involved, the stick that turns into a snake, the talking to a burning bush, all of those things. Miracles were his miracles. With Jesus, it was healing the sick and a variety of other things, because back then, in his time, medicine was developing. During the Prophet's time, it was language and poetry and people doing amazing things with language. So it makes sense then that the miracle he would leave us is the Qur'an in its full form.
Is that why, I never thought of this before though, is this why then calligraphy is an art form in Islamic art? I mean, it's not just meant to be writing, it's meant to be beautiful writing, right? And it's
Exactly. And this first copy of the Qur'an was written in calligraphy, but it didn't have any illustrations, because it was forbidden to have illustrations, but that has changed over time.
Now, an important difference, right, between Christians and Muslims would be Christians read their Bible, and the subject of it is Jesus, whom they worship, right, or whom we worship as God.
Correct.
But in Islamic tradition, first of all, Jesus is not worshipped as God; he is a prophet. But also, it's important to note Muhammad is not worshipped either. Correct? He is the prophet, but he's not worshipped. He's not the object of worship in Islamic belief.
Correct. I'm really glad you mentioned this. So it's natural, if you're not Muslim, to think that the natural comparative item from the Quran in Christianity is the Bible. That's actually incorrect. The Quran occupies the same place, the same centrality in Islam as Jesus Christ does in Christianity. And the reason why I say this, Muslims aren't meant to just read the Quran. The Quran has multiple names. So the word Quran comes from qara, which means to read, as I mentioned in the story of Revelation. But it also means ad-dhikr, which means the remembrance. So to interact with the Quran on a daily basis, which we do when we pray 5 times a day by reciting verses from the Quran, which we do by reciting it directly when we, recite verses from it. We have to be in a pure state to be able to recite from it. And when we try to read and understand and live our life in accordance to what it preaches, that's called Al-Furqan, which means what's the word? I can't think of the English translation, but it basically means the discerning right from wrong, false from correct, that kind of thing. So it has multiple names. And then Al-Huda, which is guide. So because of the way Muslims interact with it and are encouraged to even memorize it so that they could live the life, all that it embodies, it's fairer to say that we don't worship any of the people that were mentioned in the Quran, but the Qur'an itself is an aid to our worshiping God.
So the only object of worship is Allah in
Correct.
Islamic, and it is, and does this come from Islamic tradition or from the Quran that Allah is known by, was it 99 names, or is it the 99 names of God, or am I in the right ballpark here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hold on one second. Let me just because Yep. So, like I mentioned, during the first 5 verses that were revealed to the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, it says, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq." In the name, read, O Prophet, in the name of your Lord who created. Khalaq al-insana min alaq, created humans from a clinging clot. Iqra Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram, read, and your Lord is the most generous. Alladhi allama bil qalam, who taught by the pen. Allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam, taught humanity what they knew not. And that what they knew not is the 99 names. So if you read the story of how Adam was created, we are told that Adam alayhi salam was, he was created out of clay and then was taught the 99 names of God. So the 99 names of God are pretty central. So Allah means, one, which is what Muslims worship, just one God, no associations. In fact, the only sin in Islam that is considered unforgivable is making an association to Allah or rejecting Allah outright. So all other sins can be forgiven, including murder. And the other thing that I wanted to, the difference though with murder is that you can't take it back. Like you can't bring back the dead once, but it can be forgiven. The other thing about the 99 names is that some scholars believe they're categorized as masculine or feminine, which means it captures the totality of the human experience. So these are all attributes of the divine, but we as humans are able to access them. So there are words like the fashioner, the merciful, the compassionate, the forgiving, the loving. That's the one I use a lot when I officiate weddings, because one of my side hustles is I'm a wedding officiant with the Muslim wedding service. So I like to offer reflections on Al-Wadud, which is the loving. So these are all attributes that we as humans can cultivate on our own. Like it's a feasible, accomplishable thing.
So and does Allah mean something? Is it translatable at all, or is it simply a word we should accept as for what it is without attempting to translate it? Right?
No. So Allah is like a what do you call it? A majuscule is the word in French. Like a proper noun or God.
Okay.
That's what it translates as, God. Like capital G, God.
Yeah.
However, it comes from the word ilah, which means God, like smaller case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are some Muslims who will tell you there's God and there's Allah. Not true. It's the same being.
Okay. Now you talked about the centrality of the Quran with regard to shaping Muslim life. And there are in it, obviously, things that non-Muslims frequently hear in the secular press in particular. Things like, you mentioned the hijab, for example, that women wear. There's also the practice of why am I blanking it? It's usually we translate as holy war, but I know what it means.
Jihad.
Jihad. So could you talk to us first about the hijab? What does the Quran say with regard to the clothing of men and women, and where might our perceptions be a little askew as far as understanding what that means or how it's described?
Yeah, I love that question. So, if there's a lightning rod of controversy that shouldn't be, it's probably the hijab, because it's actually quite specific, where it's mentioned in the Quran. It's in three different parts. As I mentioned, one of them was with Mary when she was about to, give birth to Jesus, or actually, yeah, to Jesus. She put on a hijab as a way to like kind of separate herself from the rest of society because she was entering a spiritual state. Then another mention is actually in describing hell. There's a hijab in there, meaning a like partition, like a separation. And then the third mention is in a series of verses where it's described that the Prophet's wives, when the guests were entering, were hidden behind a hijab, so like a curtain. So those are the three references in the Quran of the hijab. And so they kind of mean just like a barrier and a separation. But the Quran does not explicitly state women should all wear the hijab like out in public. There are other verses. There's another verse in particular that says that within the context of marriage, a woman cannot reveal herself like in a full form, except for in front of, and it lists different men that they can reveal themselves. And these are all men that they are related to. So the husband, the children, the brothers, the sisters, the cousins, well, the brothers, the cousins, and then men who have no desire for women. So at the time, it could be people who are so old that they no longer have like an attraction towards women. A scholar by the name of Scott Kugel has used that to mean that it means gay men or eunuchs, things of that nature. So point is, there are modesty, also called hayat, is a value in Islam, but there is no like prescribed women. All women should cover at all times outside the prayer. For example, where I come from in Senegal, women did not cover out in public at all. It wasn't a thing that I noticed. Now it's starting to be a thing because of political interpretations by Saudi Arabia. But Malaysia, Jordan, places like that, there you will see 98% of women all wear the hijab. But the hijab is also another point of intersection between religion and culture. Like the religion says one thing, but culturally, another thing is practiced. But it doesn't necessarily contradict the religion. It's just that different Muslim societies embody it differently.
Which is why you see varieties of interpretations of what that means. Yeah, and actually, I didn't even thought of this. This is helpful because even in those cultures where it's worn, I've sometimes seen news reports where the news reporter goes into the home of a family, say in Saudi Arabia, where they're not wearing it. I always wondered why in public and why not in the home. That you just explained it for us. That was very helpful. That in that setting, they're with family. They're with other people for whom it's allowed that they do not have to wear the covering. Whereas outside, they would be required, at least depending on the culture, to wear it outside.
Yeah, and it's starting to. There's now some. That's actually a very good point because there's conversations because video has become so common. There's conversations now of can the woman shoot herself on the camera with a camera at home and be uncovered, or knowing that people who are not related to her will be watching, but she's at home and things of that nature. So some scholars now are having discussions about that.
Well, that raises a question: is so for occasions like that, where there is obviously there's not a Quranic verse of how to deal with social media. How does that work within Islamic tradition, though? There is a tradition of jurisprudence, right, in terms of how you would try to address contemporary questions.
Right.
What role does the Quran play in trying to make those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, so although the Quran is like, because it's the final word of God, you have to refer to it as a source, it's not the only source that jurists use for jurisprudence. There's also what's called the Hadith, which is translated as like accidents/events, which are events, sayings, actions that the Prophet did during his lifetime that were collected over time by scholars hundreds of years later and compiled into books called the Book of Hadith. So these include, so a lot of the rituals about how to pray, you don't actually see in the Qur'an, you see in the Hadith. Rituals around, like whether you should eat with your right hand or your left hand, things of that nature come from there, not in the Qur'an. So scholars would use that body of work, as well as studying the life of the Prophet, and then as well as, just like with scientists, when nobody can agree, then they do what's called shura, which is consensus.
Now, we've all heard in the media the references to Sharia law. What is that? Where does that come in? How is that? What's the role of Sharia law in Islamic tradition?
Yeah, so Sharia, wow, you really, I love how you've built up. Now
I'm just kind of going with the conversation, right?
Sharia law. So again, Sharia, first of all, Sharia law is redundant. Sharia means law in Arabic, or path, or guide. The path to the water is what it means. So following the rules and the guidelines to God, to fulfillment. That's usually what it means. It wasn't meant to be encoded as a government structure, legal government structure. It's meant to be a guideline for Muslims to follow. And that implies choice. What you have today in countries that practice Sharia law is they eliminate choice. So for example, a lot of Muslim countries, including the one where I come from, it's 95% Muslim, but our governing structure is not Islamic. It's like democracy. So like, there's also colonialism. It's, it's inherited from the French. However, it's not legally enforced. So as a result, you can, when you go to Senegal and it's 5 a.m., you hear the call to prayer and all Muslims running to the mosque. You also see people coming out of the club with probably a drink or two in their hands, and they're all Muslim, right? So that's kind of the culture that I come from. I'm naturally very open-minded as a result. That is not the case in a lot of, you can't generally say that about all Muslim countries, including countries like Somalia, Saudi Arabia, even Bahrain. Those countries tend to be 99 to 100% Muslim. And, but yeah, so Sharia law is controversial. It's saying that the entire society should revolve around the rulings and practice of the Islamic faith. But the moderate version of this, a moderate understanding is it also preserves the freedom of people who do not practice Islam. So non-Muslims, and including atheists. So there's no compulsion in religion is a value of Islam. However, you're not going to see that among the loudest voices, so to say.
Which is Islam is not exclusive in that respect, right? In terms of sometimes the loudest voices, perhaps being the most, sometimes the most extreme, or the requiring the most adherence to their version or their understanding of their religion.
Yep.
So I did when I sent out the link for tonight, I did ask people if they'd like to submit any questions, and one came in, and we talked about it earlier, which is jihad.
Oh, okay.
How is jihad understood, again, from within Islamic tradition, and what are we, again, what are those perhaps outside of Islam perhaps not understanding correctly about it and its role within Islamic tradition?
Yeah, so the term jihad comes from the root jahada, which means to struggle, to fight, to struggle. But So a jihad means a struggle. It can be personal as well as it can be a holy war. But even then, the holy war is not war in the way we understand with like World War II and tanks, or what we've had, in Afghanistan and things of that nature. Because there are rules around how to kill in Islam. Like you can't. I mean, I don't have time to go into all the details, but holy war, it means a personal struggle. So, for example, I'm required to pray 5 times a day, and I'm like feeling tired and I'm not in the mood to pray, but I know I have to do it. That's my jihad. That's my personal struggle. Like it's a struggle to fulfill the requirements of the religion. And then there's the, holy war, and it's usually, first of all, like one of the rules of war that I will give you, it always has to be in self-defense. If you're under attack and your life is in danger, then you can fight. But even then, you have to preserve the nobility of your enemy and give them chances to forgive. So like there's a lot of, caveats to that. When people say, oh, jihad, when you hear people scream jihad and like, perform a suicide bombing, that is not prescribed in any Islamic precept or ruling at all. And that's unfortunate. That's an unfortunate reality with, where Islam is today. In the way that Christianity was, I think, around the turn of the 19th century, where there was inciting a lot of violence, I think that's where Islam is right now. And so there's a movement right now to push for reform, which is a controversial word because the religion is already perfect. So there isn't anything to reform. Mm. But the people and the interpretations can be reformed, right? So.
Yes, because obviously one of the things I'm sure you've heard from people is Islam is a religion that promotes violence, correct? And again, if that's the perception we hold, what are we not understanding about Islam?
I will say that. Oh, sorry. Islam is not. Yeah, it's not any more violent than any other religion, and in fact, I think so. I'll tell you where that argument comes from. It comes from Orientalism in the 19th century. There's this rewriting of this interpretation by Western colonial Orientalist scholars that because the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, fought so many wars during his lifetime and Jesus didn't, and this belief that the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, had so many wives and Jesus didn't, that Islam as a result is X, Y, and Z. So it was always framed in a colonial perspective, putting white Christianity, I'm going to say white Christianity, because we know Jesus wasn't white. By the way, fun fact, all of the prophets, peace and blessing be upon him, had the same look. They all looked the same. Every single one at different times. They all had like darker, like more Mediterranean, like bushy hair and all of that. And they were all like built the same way too, kind of like, bulky and wide chest, long beards, etc. If there's anything you take away from this presentation, I want you to know that, okay? Jesus was not white, nor was any other prophet. And second of all, sorry, where was I? What was the question again?
We were talking about the perception of Islam being violence, and
so it's not anymore. It's not anymore. Yeah, it's not any more violent than any religion has been in the past or present. Every religion you can identify periods of nonstop violence, and it's just that, because of the history of the world that we live in right now, Islam is the favored other, and so anything that Muslims do that is quote unquote bad, Islam gets the perception of being a religion of violence, and it just isn't. Yeah. It's only 0.06% of people who you could categorize as a violent extremists.
Okay.
but they're the ones who get the most attention.
Sure, they get the press, right, or they get the attention. Someone has a question here about Islamic understanding of God. If there's in Christianity, there's a whole systematizing about God. God is three persons, one nature, about the nature of being. God is the essence of being. Is there any kind of similar theological interpretation or work in Islamic tradition about the nature of Allah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the primary principle of God of Islam is Tawheed, which means one. So there is no Trinity. In fact, there's a verse in the Qur'an in which Jesus, as he's inside of the belly of Mary, voices out loud that something to the effect of, the people of the past did not know, but there is no God is one, and there is no association to him. So it explicitly rejects the Trinity as a principle in the Quran. Which I apologize for saying that, but I'm just explaining to you what the Quran says.
That's absolutely okay. I mean, this is again about how different traditions, right?
Yeah.
How they see the world from within their context, their setting,
Exactly.
and not us trying to make you believe something you don't believe, right?
But I have heard that the Trinity is the analogy that makes sense to me is like it's an egg. The egg is one thing, but has three different parts, but it's all one egg. I don't know if you.
Christianity has used a lot of analogy to try. In Christian theology, right? Part of it is it's a mystery. That is, because it's divine, because God is divine, and we are mortals.
Correct.
We use the language we have at hand to affirm a truth that we know is also beyond our understanding. They both exist at the same time. So Christians affirm God as three persons, one substance, while at the same time recognizing that language in and of itself is inadequate to capture all that God is, right? You mentioned this, and we'll finish here because we're right at the point about the hour point. But that was, you said that the verses of the Quran as they came to the Prophet were written down on different scraps of paper, bone, whatever, and then they were collected. And I know that after his death, there was a disagreement as far as who inherited the leadership. And so Islam also has denominations or sects the way Christianity and Judaism do. So could you talk just a little bit about that? And we'll use that. That'll be the final point of our conversation tonight.
Yes, absolutely. So after the Prophet died in 632, he left behind no male heirs. All of his surviving children were women. So there was discussion about who would be the next Caliph, which means the ruler of the Caliphate, so like the kingdom that the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him, created. And there was a disagreement. There was a strong contingent that believed it should have been Ali, his cousin, so someone related to the Prophet, peace and blessing be upon him. Others believed that they didn't want to replicate what happened in the Jahiliyyah, which was nobility kind of ruling things. So there was a democratically elected person named Umar as the first caliph. So Umar would rule for 2 years and then pass away. Then the next person, Abu Bakr was the first one. I'm sorry, Abu Bakr. And then the second one, he ruled for 2 years. Then the second one, Umar, ruled for about 12 years. And then the next one, Uthman, who we mentioned, ruled from 644 to 656, so 12 more years. And he was actually assassinated because during the first 3 caliphate rulings, there was a contingent of people who were siding with Ali, who felt like scorned that Ali hadn't been picked. And they became the Shia Ali, which is now abbreviated as Shia, while the Sunni were associated with the Sunnah, which is the life of the Prophet specifically. So the Shia became affiliated with the family of the Prophet, and the Sunnah as just the body of actions and things that the Prophet left behind. So that was when the division happened. And then that division solidified when Uthman, the third caliph, was murdered by the Shia. And then Ali became the fourth caliph, who served until his death. And that became like the sever in the Muslim faith that to this day has not been mended. So if you watch Middle Eastern news and you hear about Shia Sunni conflicts, that was the source 1,300 years ago.
Well, thank you, Mohamedou. I really appreciate you joining us tonight for this conversation. It was very, very helpful. I hope it was informative to those who joined us here tonight as well, that you learned something about the scriptural tradition within Islam.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This was absolutely wonderful. And I'm glad.